So what I did is I had one of the folks that works in my planning department, I just said I wanted to put a few slides in that were shown at our last quarterly investment review. Not to talk about, you know, what was in the investment review, but to just kind of get me started on talking about some of the stories that are associated with these different resources and all that. So the first one, just ignore what's on the page except for that 97 billion barrels. That chart up there just shows ExxonMobil's resource base. ExxonMobil has a really varied and deep resource base, and we have access to about 97 billion oil equivalent barrels of resource that haven't been commercialized yet, and so, or that haven't been produced yet. So you can see it's proved reserves and, you know, others that we're looking at designing development concepts for, and other stuff that's called evaluating. Bottom line is we produce about 1.6 billion barrels a year. So we have over 60 years of resources that are contained within that resource base. And I will tell you that I get zero credit for adding new resources to that resource base unless they're going to jump right in front of all the other resources that we have there and be more commercially valuable and easier to develop. So we're not exploring to just find barrels. The world is awash in barrels and trillions of cubic feet of gas and all that. It's to have things that are more commercially and environmentally acceptable than the ones that we have now. So it's not about a volumes game. We talk about volumes all the time, but it's really about getting better resources and upgrading our resource base. Super important, super important. So this is why I'm standing here and somebody else from ExxonMobil isn't standing here, because we're pretty good at it. We've actually done really well over the last few years and added more resources, both by the bit and through acquisitions, than our other competitors. And you'll see that a lot of our other competitors are generating a lot more cash. We're spending a lot more money on that anticipated growth as we see going down the road. So let me just talk about the key elements or the key things that we see as driving that growth as we go forward. So there's the big five that we're working on, that as we go to 2025, we'll add about 50%, we'll generate about 50% of all of ExxonMobil's upstream earnings. So upstream is exploration and development production, okay? Downstream is refining and marketing, and then we have a big chemicals company. So in any given year, about 70% of our earnings in the corporation come from the upstream. And then the rest is divided between, the 30% is divided by chemicals and refining. So upstream is super important. The profitability of the corporation is really wrapped around upstream. So let me start by talking about Guyana, which is my, oh no, I want to talk about this first. So this is just talking about our acreage that we've added in the last 10 years. And I just want to share with you kind of what happened to us in 2014. So 2014 for me was like the worst year ever. 2014, I had worked for the last 3 years before that to build a big portfolio in Russia. So we had, with Rosneft, our partner, we had a huge Arctic position, by far the best Arctic position of any of our competitors. We had access to the tight oil in the West Siberian Basin and the best acreage of the Bajanov, which is the big source rock there. And I had the whole northern part of the Black Sea under contract to Exxon. Worked 3 years, and Donna knows I wasn't around much while we were trying to put that together. That was my third stint in Russia. And 2014, we went out and we were drilling our first big Arctic well. That was the most expensive well that ExxonMobil had ever drilled. And right before we got to the target on that well, we had whatever happened in Ukraine, and we had sanctions put on our business. And the sanctions were targeted at offshore Arctic, unconventional, and deep water. And there was only one person that had that portfolio, and that was me. So that was the biggest part of my portfolio, and that basically went on hold in 2015. We've been working on that for a long, long time. In addition, I put together a significant acreage position in Kurdistan, Iraq. The best block that we had was a block called Bashika, which we still hold, just north of Mosul. And just when we were getting ready to start drilling there, ISIS decided to go take over Mosul, and that block became a staging ground for the Allied forces that were trying to defend Kurdistan. So that was gone. I had a big block I was going to drill in Liberia. And Liberia, you know, big DHI, well, big direct hydrocarbon indicator, we were high on that block. And that's when the Ebola epidemic started in Liberia. So needless to say, I was like, you know, and prices collapsed, oh, by the way, prices totally collapsed. So I remember the chairman at the time, like, you know, Steve, I don't know what you're doing, but just stop. Stop what you're doing. You know? So, you know, we sort of had this soul searching, you know, we're like, oh, you know, what do we do? And we recognized that with this price collapse, most of the companies were well overextended. They had way too much going on. And we thought, you know, because this is a cyclic business, that things were going to come back, and that it was a super time for us to invest countercyclically and pick up new opportunities. So we got everybody focused on new opportunity generation and picking up new acreage. And it turned out to be a perfect time because most of our competitors were very, very low activity, you know, relatively small exploration efforts. They weren't funding anything. And we were able to kind of get whatever we wanted. And so we were able to amass a new portfolio, which is by far, any measure, way, way better than what we had before. So that's why we brag a little bit about the new portfolio, because it's all brand new, and it's a higher quality than we had even before that 2014 period when you know, people were spending tons of money, high oil prices, everything was overextended. So let's talk about Guyana. How am I doing? Let's talk about Guyana, because Guyana is a sort of a model that I want to talk about that gives you an impression of how long and how difficult it is to amass a significant position that's going to move the needle for a company like ExxonMobil. So if you don't know where Guyana is, it's just to the east of Venezuela. It was a British colony. It was independent in the early 1960s. Really, really interesting place. About 850,000 people, 85% virgin rainforest. You know, just an amazing place. But also the lowest per capita income in South America. So it's bordered by Venezuela on to its west, Brazil to its south, and Suriname, or Dutch Guyana, to its east. So the way we typically try to build a position is we'll do a regional analysis. We'll build a basin from the bottom up and try to see how the basin opened, how the source rocks may have been deposited, whether there was oceanographic circumstances for a source rock to be developed. Then we'll look at how the rivers drained and whether there are reservoirs, and then how the basin was structured. We call that regional analysis, and those regional analysis form the basis for how we want to go in and kind of look at a basin. Everybody else is doing that too, so it's very, very competitive. Guyana, in the mid-90s, we had done one of these big regional studies on the northern part of South America and the Caribbean Basin, opened up the Caribbean Basin. And we said, you know, this source rock that is present in Venezuela, and we all know that Venezuela is a hugely prolific area. The source rock that's in Venezuela is called La Luna, late Cretaceous, and we saw that that should extend over into the Guyana area. And there was really no reason why we shouldn't have a prolific hydrocarbon system offshore Guyana. However, when you look at Guyana and you look at the seismic data that's out there, there's no structures. There's absolutely, you know, structures are how we trap hydrocarbons. There were no structures. And so consequently, about Guyana at the time, and they looked at the seismic data that was out there, and they said, well, there's really nothing out here, except for one big bump that was supposed to be a seamount, which we later drilled and found it as a carbonate buildup full of oil, but that's another story. And so we went out and this super talented Australian guy that we had that was running the South American area at the time went out and made a contract with the government of Guyana to go out and start exploring in the offshore. So went off, and we had another company, a major, that was interested as well, and so they did what's called a farm-in, and they shot. There were 2-3 year periods when they shot 2D seismic, shot 3D seismic, so we didn't have to pay for any of that. But in the middle of all this, there was a border dispute with Suriname, and we went into force majeure. And it went to the International Court of Justice, which held it up for years and years and years. So fast forward to about 2006, 2007, border dispute was resolved. We got busy exploring. Our partner paid for all this seismic and all that. And the third 3-year period, which was beginning in 2015, our partner decided that Guyana really wasn't worth their time and all that, and having shot all the seismic and spent all this money all these years, basically left and threw their keys on the table. So kind of left me with, okay, I'm going to drill this at 100%, it's very risky, or what am I going to do? So I took a couple other partners, Hess and Nexen, and we went out and drilled a feature called Liza, which is a pure stratigraphic trap, not a structure. And Liza was the largest oil discovery that year in 2015, and still the largest oil discovery. No one's drilled a bigger oil discovery since then. And that proved up an entire new basin. And since then, we've drilled 8 new discoveries, and we proved up over 4 billion barrels of resource. Now, if you do the math, 4 billion barrels of super high quality oil resource for the benefit of 850,000 people that live there, I think you would say that you kind of wish that you were born in Guyana right now, Because it's going to be a real windfall. So our challenge now, obviously the geology is fabulous, and we're working all that, and we have the wherewithal to develop this and all that. But the issue, again, is one of the nation's future. You've seen examples of where, example in Qatar, the Middle East, where that oil wealth or gas wealth has generated huge amounts of prosperity and huge amounts of benefits for the people, and you've also seen where it hasn't. So that's our challenge as we go forward, not just the technical challenges, but to make sure we help them and we get them all the resources to be able to use all this oil wealth and to do it in a way that's going to benefit the country. So the point that I want to make there, about Guyana, can I go back? Is that it takes a long time. These things can go on for decades. They cross multiple political cycles. All of the things that we work on take decades, where political cycles may take 2, 4, 6, 8 years. So that's the challenge that we have. There is a huge technical challenge. There's a huge challenge in everything we do, but the geopolitical challenges generally are the hardest because of the time frame that go on. So that's the deal. It's a long time coming. Brazil, I use as a story of it's not over. It ain't over till it's over. So Brazil is an interesting story for us in ExxonMobil. We were there in the early 70s. We drilled some wells offshore Amazon. We were in shallow water. We were unsuccessful, and we left the country. We had a big downstream business there where we sold gasoline and all that. But then both Exxon and Mobil, before we merged, both heritage companies had just gathered, when they opened up, Petrobras opened up to foreign investment in the late 90s. Both Exxon and Mobil heritage companies had big acreage spreads in Brazil. And when we merged the company, I was the Brazil exploration manager. And so we had one really good block. It was in the Campos Basin, which is where they had discovered all this deep water oil. And we found a bunch of oil there. And we had a whole bunch of other blocks that were all these new basins. And so I drilled 13 consecutive dry-holes offshore Brazil. I think the lesson there is you can do that and still work for ExxonMobil. So we drill all those. They were all what's called post-salt. There's a thick sedimentary cover, a thick layer of salt, and then some geology underneath it where the source rocks are and all that. So I drilled all those wells. We kind of licked our wounds, went home. And there was an emerging play that we recognized, and that, of course, a lot of our competitors recognized underneath the salt, where there was a very active hydrocarbon system. We knew that's where all the oil was coming from. And we struggled internally with whether, if we drilled through the salt, would those reservoirs would be able to produce commercially and all that. So we were kind of late to the party, even though we had a big Brazil position. And we had one big structure in Brazil in the pre-salt, which we subsequently drilled dry for a number of different reasons. Whereas many of our competitors, especially Petrobras, came in and made those discoveries that I was talking about earlier. New government came in, ceased all licensing rounds in the pre-salt. As you know, it was a government that was very, very, I'd say, left-leaning in terms of not wanting to license anything outside of the Petrobras operatorship. And so we ended up not doing anything for years, but we kept the team working hard on the pre-salt so that we would be prepared if it ever opened up. And sure enough, a couple of years ago, in 2017, they had licensing rounds in the pre-salt. And I think a lot of our competitors were sort of still waiting to see, waiting and watching and all that. And we knew that's exactly what we wanted. We knew these structures were super high quality. So we've ended up over the last couple of years building the largest acreage position in the pre-salt of any company other than Petrobras. We bought a discovered field from Petrobras, and we've got these tremendous new opportunities that are out there. So that's what we're counting on for the future. And it kind of goes to this story of in the oil and gas business, because these cycles are so long, it's never really over until it's over. You want to be there first, because about 3/4 of all the oil is discovered in most basins before any of the first oil is produced. You want to be there first, but if you're not there first, you've got to stick to it. And I guess that's a life lesson too. You stick to it, and because it's never over till it's over.